Hello, everyone. Welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Friday, December 6th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about Kyle Mooney's latest film, Y2K, and we'll present interviews with the movie's cast and crew. My name is Ben Pearson. I am an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
All right, Brad, you and I are both fans of Kyle Mooney's previous movie, Brigsby Bear, and now he's back with his second feature film. So, what did you think about Y2K?
Yes, to reiterate, I love Kyle Mooney. I love the work he did on Saturday Night Live, especially the stuff he did with Beck Bennett, who he's been working with for years, back since they had their own like little comedy troupe called Good Neighbor. And so seeing him make Brigsby Bear was a real treat since I got to see it at Sundance, and it was a really unique approach to comedy. And funnily enough, this movie kind of has a similar framework in a way, because much like Brigsby Bear, the first 15 minutes of Brigsby Bear, it kind of sets up this like different world that you're in, and you're not entirely sure, what it's going to be. And then there's a very early twist that it's like, oh, this is something else entirely. And this kind of takes a similar approach. It takes a little longer before the turn comes, and it's not a turn that they're necessarily being shy about in the marketing either. But it's a similar thing where it's the movie, really sets it up as like this typical teenage party comedy that just so happens to take place on New Year's Eve, 1999, and then turns into like a, faculty Gremlins-esque technology terror movie where you have these teens who are running from these murderous monsters. And so for me, it was so much fun because it's clear that Kyle Mooney has an affinity for the time in which that he grew up. He basically grew up around the same time that we did. And so, he was around during Y2K, and when there was the potential scare of like no one knew what was going to happen with like computers and stuff like that because of the weird glitch with like the clocks changing over to the year 2000 and everything. And so I couldn't believe that nobody had really done this premise to its full potential like this, because it's such an easy no-brainer concept. And so the fact that they were able to do this and make it a horror comedy was so much fun. And I love the practical effects in this movie that they use to bring the techno creatures to life. I like the comedic tone because it's a little absurd, but it doesn't like mean that there still isn't like weight to the proceedings for the characters, and the dynamic between Jaeden Martell and Julian Dennison as friends, and the love story between Jaeden Martell and Rachel Ziegler, that is percolating throughout the entire movie. So yeah, I walked away and I was very happy with this movie. I was fully entertained and liked it a lot.
I was also extremely entertained. I saw the trailer and, I love the concept. I saw the trailer and I was like, man, I don't know. This has the potential to break either way, I think. Even though I loved Brigsby Bear, I think I was just kind of like, I don't know, that this seems like a bit of a tightrope walk. And I think he pretty much nailed the tone that he was going for. But in some ways, this is kind of like a tale of two movies. And you said it a minute ago. There's like this sort of coming of age story, and then this more like sci-fi horror apocalyptic type of story. So what did you think about, let's like dissect those things individually. What did you think about how the coming of age part of it and like the more traditional part of it, did you think that stuff worked really well, or did that feel almost secondary to, or I guess did either part of these kind of feel secondary to the other one?
No, honestly, I thought they came together pretty nicely. I didn't ever feel like one was sacrificed for the other, or that they felt out of sync with each other. They did a good job of bouncing back and forth between like the dark comedy that comes from the nightmare that's unfolding and how they react to it, and little jokes here and there about how things are happening and what's going on, and just like the dynamic between characters. But then also, honing in on them as characters, because you do feel like the friendship between Jaeden Martell and Julian Dennison, and you feel like maybe it's starting to fracture a little bit because Jaeden is still, his character is kind of a bit more introverted, and he's not quite growing up, and figuring out who he is as quickly as Julian Dennison is. He doesn't have the same confidence, and so there's a bit of a fracture there. But you can tell that they're still, friends even when they're having trouble, figuring out how they're going to move forward as as friends as they continue to grow up. And even the romance stuff I thought worked really well too. There's a cute chemistry between Rachel Ziegler and Jaeden Martell, and it feels familiar because it pulls from like the vibe of movies like Can't Hardly Wait and stuff like that. I think Kyle, he didn't say this in this interview, but I saw him and co-writer and producer Evan Winter at an early screening in Chicago, and they talked about how Ethan Embry's character in Can't Hardly Wait was kind of like what they were shooting for with Jaeden Martell's character.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I was actually pretty impressed by how well it all kind of came together in a single movie.
Yeah, BJ was talking about the movie a little bit on Wednesday's episode of the show, and she was like praising the practical effects and the sort of like basically it's like a bunch of guys in suits walking around, but like it's almost tough to tell where a person begins and where the technology begins in this thing, because it's so well designed, and like there's these as like all of the sort of technology and computer parts and stuff like that begin to fuse and meld together, they form these humanoid looking creatures and stuff, and it's just like a really cool visualization of a basic idea that we've seen a million times in a million other sci-fi things. So what did you think about that aspect of it?
No, they are incredibly well done, because they are like completely practical. And I talked to Kyle and Evan about this, and you'll hear them mention about working with those practical effects and how Weta designed them. And it was really interesting to hear how they were able to actually make them happen and execute it in a fully way that they initially imagined. And one of the actually things I really appreciated is, at first I was like just the tiniest bit frustrated, because when they jump into the technology like coming to life and starting to kill people, there's no real like explanation or showing as to like how all these pieces of technology are coming together. And they kind of slow roll it, because after they've been on the run for a little bit, they actually then visually show you like, oh, this is how these pieces are actually coming together, and it's another cool beat that shows off the practical effects and how the creatures are forming. And they also slowly like reveal later on exactly why this is happening and what is driving all of these pieces of technology to come together and fight against humans. So I really like that aspect of the story.
Yeah, and the aspect you were just talking about, like the physically showing how it comes together, it looked like it was done almost with like stop motion or something. I don't know if they actually used stop motion or just were able to sort of replicate that look, but but it has that sort of old school tactile feel that I think they're definitely going for in this movie. So, all right. So I think broadly speaking, just general thoughts, you and I both really enjoyed this and would definitely recommend people check it out. I do want to talk to you about a couple of spoilery things. So I'm going to right now just say we're going to spoil this movie, Y2K. It's out in theaters right now. Go see it. If you don't want to know anything, press pause and then come back. Okay, so Brad, I was shocked when Julian Dennison's character was killed off so early in the movie. What the hell? Like,
I was. If there's, I don't even know if I want to call it a misstep, because I was disappointed, because I love Julian Dennison and he's hilarious, and I would have thought that like their friendship dynamic would have been something that like needed to continue to the end. But I guess like it gives Jaeden a new like center as far as like a driving force, and like it changes like his perspective on things, and gives him an emotional hurdle to overcome. So I think it still works in the story. But yeah, personally, I was a little bummed, because I love Julian Dennison, and it felt like, oh man, he's gone already.
Yeah. So just I'm sort of scattershot here in my observations, but one thing that I wanted to mention is I appreciate how this movie is pretty goofy on the surface, and especially some of the comedy stuff. I mean, it's a very specific comedy tone, and we can talk about that in just a second. But I thought there's a moment where Jaeden Martell's character gets on a stage at the end of the movie and basically delivers this speech that is like pretty cheesy, but also makes the movie feel like it's actually about something in terms of like, basically the message, as far as I understood it, was kind of like, we can come together and we don't necessarily have to let technology rule our lives. Just because it has the ability to control every aspect of our modern society doesn't necessarily mean that we have to let it, that we have to live our lives centered around this technology in this way or whatever. And I think you could have extrapolated that message from just watching the movie, but then having that character actually say it, and like the music is kind of swelling behind him a little bit, and it feels like this sort of inspirational moment. I thought that was pretty well done, especially because it was then immediately undercut by people in the audience that he's giving the speech to being like, who the hell is this kid? There's
Yeah.
just like these
No,
background moments
that's
where
stupid.
yeah, exactly. Like the characters in the movie reject the message that he's giving, but I,
Yeah.
as the audience member, took that message like to heart, and I thought that was like a really smart way to just underline the foundational messaging that's trying to be expressed here. So,
Yeah,
um,
100%. Yeah, because it does a good job of doing exactly what most of society does, which is reject that concept entirely.
yeah. So I did want to ask about the comedic aspect because, like, I guess I like Kyle Mooney as a performer. I think he was a little much here. I think he, as the uh, co-writer and director of this, kind of like fell in love with his own performance a little bit, because I think when he shows up as the uh, whatever marijuana smoking blockbuster employee, basically, and I thought his introduction in the movie was really great, and then later on the characters reunite with him at this sort of I don't know, like burned out no electricity building where he's part of a group called the Collective. And I just thought the movie lingered on him and his lines and his jokes and stuff like that, maybe a little too long, where it started to feel like the a little bit of the gas was coming out of the thing a little bit. But I wondered if that was just a me thing or if you also felt that.
I do think that there are a couple instances where some of his character's bits don't fully land, or they just take a little bit too long of a beat. Because, like, for example, I think the part where he chooses to fight the one of the techno creatures with devil
Yes.
sticks is really funny, but it lingers for a little too long, and it's like, no, we got the punchline. Let's move on.
Yeah, it almost felt like he was trying to do like an anime confrontation or
Yeah.
something. And I just don't know if that necessarily, if it translated super well, or if that was like necessary for the moment. Like, it didn't really enhance the bit,
Yeah,
I
part
guess.
of I would wager, probably just because like their frame of reference for like that period of pop culture is so specific, that I wonder if there's something very specific that they wanted to replicate, which is probably
Mm,
why it went for so long. Because I one of the things that actually Kyle talks about in his interview is that, like, one of the things that he learned at SNL, and that he doesn't have a problem with when he's making his own movies, is he's never precious about cutting something if it doesn't work. And so, like, no matter how much he likes something, if it feels like it's not fitting in with the movie and it makes it, mess up, then he'll cut it out. So I don't know if this was a case where, like, they maybe it did work in several test screens, so they kept it in, but maybe it just, didn't land, whatever, once the final cut was in, or, I'm not entirely sure, but yeah. So, like, I do agree with your assessment there on a couple of things.
So, what did you think about the inclusion of Fred Durst in this movie? He
Oh my
becomes a
god,
surprisingly large supporting character.
I loved it so much. It is so funny. His introduction is amazing. The fact that he's fully himself is so funny. The allusions and references to Limp Bizkit and his entire presence in the third act is just a comedic treat and a gift. And what's really interesting, and I'll mention again that I talked to Kyle and Evan about this in my interview, is I was wondering if there was anybody else that you could have put into that role and it would have made anywhere near as much sense, because, like, obviously there were a ton of 90s musical figures who were very popular and very well known during the time, but Fred Durst captures a very, like, specific niche in that era of, like, angry, rock rap music, and, like, it's something that, like, fits the tone of, like, what they're trying to execute here. And just, like, the attitude of someone like that, and meeting a person who is known for being, like, in pop culture, and, like, his image as, like, this kind of bad boy badass dude, and putting him in this kind of role is so funny, and it fits so perfectly. And I don't even know what they would have done if they, if he didn't do it, because it just makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I really got a lot of respect for him because I missed the whole boat on the Limp Bizkit thing when that was happening. I mean,
Oh, no
obviously,
way.
like all of my peers were listening to that music, and I was just more listening to whatever 80s rock and stuff. I don't know. I just like did
Travis
not.
Tritt.
No, definitely not country. But yeah, I sort of I knew of Fred Durst almost more of a as like a cultural figure, and then in the pop culture sphere, it kind of felt like he was a joke. You know, he was like there were a lot of jokes made at his expense at the time, and for him to all these years later be comfortable enough with sort of poking fun at his own persona and all of that, it gave me a lot of respect for him as a person, and I really appreciated what he was doing here, and like the idea of him getting up and singing George Michael's Faith, you know, on a
Yeah.
stage is like not something that I ever would have expected. I was trying to think of, you know, you were mentioning, is there any other person who might have been able to do something like this? The only thing that came to mind is like Chad Kroger from Nickelback, but I think that was like
Yeah, I think that
maybe
was a little
a little
little after.
later.
Yeah,
Yeah, like a
I think that
couple
was
a few years later.
early 2000s. I think.
But that kind of thing where it's like a figure who is almost like he's beloved by few and kind of reviled by many type of thing
Yeah, I
in the
think
pop
if
culture
it
sphere.
maybe they might have been able to pull it off with Kid Rock, but because of what Kid Rock is these days,
Yeah.
that's there's no reason to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point too. Okay, so I just have to highlight, this is so stupid, Brad, that I'm even bringing this up because this movie is a comedy, and like I just being like, "Hey, remember that joke?" is so dumb, but I have to call this one out because it made me laugh so hard. So there's this kind of touching death scene with Julian Dennison's character where he dies like saving his friends basically, and there's this really moving moment, and then everybody's like, "All right, we got to go, we got to move on." And I don't have the name of the actor in front of me, but he was in Stranger Things. He has like really long hair. He was in
Oh yeah,
American Vandal as well, and he is like this sort of I don't know, this like leader of this
his name's
subgroup of.
Eduardo Franco.
Yes, Eduardo Franco. He's the leader of the sort of rap rock or rap or whatever you want to call it. That clique that plays a pretty significant role
Yeah,
in it.
and they're kind of bullying Jaeden Martell and always making fun of him.
Yes, and he suits up in rollerblades. And the second after this death scene with Julian Edison's character, where I'm like left reeling as an audience member because I was not expecting that death to happen so quickly in the movie, uh, he goes outside. Eduardo's character goes outside and sees a basketball goal that has fallen over, and is like, "Oh, sweet! Like, hang on just a second. I gotta like skate on this," and just tries to grind on this rail basically, and just falls over and immediately dies. And
Yeah,
the back-to-back deaths with one meaning something and the other one meaning absolutely nothing, but just serving as this perfect capsule for like a joke delivery, but also like reminding the audience what kind of movie they're in, and just being like a really dumb thing that matches up with Kyle Mooney's sense of humor. That just really tickled me. I don't know. There's no other. I don't have any like deeper read on it. It just made me laugh really, really hard. So
yeah. No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And to do another point out how much I appreciated a gag thing is Julian Dennison singing and dancing to the thong song
oh yeah,
at the party was a great bit too.
I have to wonder like how many young people even know what that song is. Like that seems like so specific. And there's a moment where like Jaeden Martell is on his bike riding through a neighborhood, and there's a family doing the Macarena and stuff, and I'm like,
Yeah,
it brings me back. And there's like a Tamagotchi, there's all these like 1999 references, and it brings me back to that. But I do have to wonder like how much some of this stuff is just going to completely go over the heads of younger audiences who were not there. So I guess Kyle Mooney just like didn't give a shit about that really, and was just kind of making it more for people like us who were there and were cognizant and remembered all this stuff. But
yeah.
yeah, anyway. Okay, so any closing thoughts before we take a break and get into these interviews, Brad?
No, I really hope people see this movie because it's really funny. It's a nice change of pace from what we normally get in December as far as awards contenders and holiday comedies and Christmas movies and stuff like that. So I hope that people venture out to see it because it's definitely worth your time. It's extremely enjoyable and it's just a good little horror comedy.
Yeah, you definitely won't see a hacking montage in any other 2024 movie quite like this one.
Oh, that's the other thing that I was going to talk about. I really love how the whole hacking aspect of the movie and like the defeating of the techno villain who is like the essentially the AI or whatever at the center of it doesn't
Mhm.
really make logistical sense, just like a late '90s movie would, where like that's not how hacking works, or like yeah. So
Yeah.
I really appreciated that lean into that aspect of technology.
Yeah, that montage made it crystal clear that they just did not give a crap at all about the logistics of it, and it was
Yeah,
more about the vibes than anything. So
yeah,
they definitely
exactly.
captured that really well. Okay, let's take a break, and then we'll come back and get into your interviews with the filmmakers. All right, first up, we have your conversation with Jaeden Martell and Julian Dennison, two of the stars of this movie. Anything you want to say before we jump into this?
No, it was really great talking to these guys. Julian, I've really enjoyed since his performance in Hunt for the Wilder People, and it's great to see him grow up into an adult and continue to do comedies like this. And it was great talking to Jaeden too, because I asked him about, since he typically does more dramatic work, what it was like getting into comedy, and he was very honest and vulnerable about how scared he was, especially because he's a big fan of Kyle Mooney. So it was really interesting to hear him talk about that in a very honest and open way. Just that fear of digging into something that he hadn't really touched yet, especially with somebody that he looks up to and has liked their work for so long.
Cool. All right, here is Brad's chat with Jaeden and Julian.
So just to start off with, you guys are both born after Y2K. So what was your frame of reference for Y2K before this movie? Is that something that they teach as part of like modern history in school, or?
What is that? That's funny. I didn't think so. Um, yeah, it was just maybe just tapping into the culture, just listening to some music, watching some flicks, what they were into. And then it opened up a lot of conversations me doing this movie, talking to people about their actual experience leading up to Y2K and the fear that they had.
Yeah.
Which I feel like most people were just kind of brushing under the rug before doing this film. I feel like when they talked about it, it's like, oh yeah, that's just maybe a thing that's gonna happen. But now that the conversation is open, people were like, oh yeah, I got ready. I knew someone with a bunker. Like I was under a table. Crazy things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like talking to like older siblings and older cousins who'd kind of, kind of like teens when it was happening, and um, yeah, just them telling me funny stories about what they were doing and where they were at, or if they were at like a party and stuff like that. So I think it was, yeah, kind of like Jaden, like watching films and listening to music of the time, and also just having like we had really really long great conversations with like Carl and Evan, and yeah, just asked a lot of questions about what we were doing and why we were doing stuff and why we were saying certain things and stuff like that. So
Yeah. What was some of the your favorite movies and music that you discovered in getting in the vibe for 1999?
Mm. I've always been a big 90s hip hop fan, so like Tribe Called Quest and Digable Plans for Far Side and stuff like that. But I kind of had to stay away from that as that wasn't my character's forte.
Right.
Um, but I've always been obsessed with that. I'm not a huge fan of the other stuff though, the poppy 90s and early 2000s stuff. Not to talk shit about crap. But
Not like an NSYNC, Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears kind of person.
I don't know if I can do that. I can. Well, Town Philly's back in. I'm done with that. Boys to Men, something.
There you go. How about you, Julian?
yeah, I think like I grew up like mom and dad and older siblings always played like 90s R&B, and I don't know, a lot of Destiny's Child and a lot of stuff like that. So I feel like Danny is also like an undercover, really loves like, 90s R&B, but like never got the chance to kind of play it because he, hung out with Eli and he wasn't into that. And so I think something like the Cisco Thong song is like so Danny, and he's like, this is my chance. Like this is the only moment I'm ever gonna be able to use this to my advantage. So
Yeah. Now, had you heard Thong Song before that came out? Did that make its way, down in your neck of the woods, or was that
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. No, no, for sure. Like Cisco is still huge in New Zealand. Okay, we get everything 30 years after
a?
you guys know. No, yeah, of course. Like, the thong song. Like, I vividly remember like my mum like turning that off on the radio. She's like, "We are not listening to a song about women's underpants." So yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, it was fun. Like, it was just funny. Like listening to it and being like, "Man, this is a part of my job." Like, my
Yeah.
girlfriend would like FaceTime me and she'd be like, "What did you do today?" And I'm like, "Oh, I had the day off and I listened to like the thong song for like 3.5 hours." So yeah.
How long did it take you to get the dance moves down?
To be honest, not long at all, and I'm gonna blow my own whistle on that one. Yeah, I
Right.
don't know. I did like a 2 hour dance class like a week before shooting, and they're like, "Just remember this, and you'll be fine." Yeah, and there's actually it's really really funny. I just said that and I was like stressed out. But the scene we shot like at the end where he's doing like all the kind of he's like a ghost, I guess, like he's in heaven.
Yeah.
We shot that like months after we were shooting, and it was like on the other side of the world. And I remember like I was like in Ireland at the time shooting something else, and I had to like get on like a dance. Like I had to this is like 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like dancing in my apartment, and I'm like dancing like with this choreographer on Zoom to like the Cisco thong song, and I'm shooting this other project, and the person who lived under me was a cast member as well, and they texted me and they're like, "Hey, are you okay? I'm trying to get sleep. Like, we have like an early start in the morning," and I was like, "I'm so sorry. I have to shoot this thing for this film I'm doing, but I had to do like doing the dance moves, and it's quite embarrassing." No.
So what was it about the script for Y2K that caught your guys' interest? Were you familiar with Kyle's work on Saturday Night Live before this opportunity came along, or was it just a fun story and you like the characters and their dynamic?
Definitely a fun story, and I did love the dynamic, the very honest dynamic between these two guys and the rest of the cast as well. But I am a huge fan of Kyle's. I left him on SNL, but I was a big fan of his stuff, Good Neighbor stuff
Yeah.
he put out on the internet. I mean, that was very informative um for a kid like me and kids my age, and like shaping our humor and how we like. I mean, definitely for my friends and I, we would watch so much together that it kind of helped us form our own language with one another.
That's great.
So I was a huge fan of his.
How about you, Julian?
Yeah, I think a big fan of him as well. I think one of his skits that I love is does he go to like a guitar convention? And
Hmm.
those ones where he did the interviews,
The
but he doesn't
convention.
speak like he
Yeah,
just
yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
speak any
Yeah, yeah.
real words. I think like just
What's the
stuff like
first song
that.
for some of these guys?
Huh?
What's the first song for some
Oh
of these guys?
yeah.
Feel like, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so I don't know. It was just I was compelled by like Danny and kind of like the turn it takes after the first act in terms of like where he ends up and then um and how kind of it's used to propel the other characters and support kind of like the overarching story of it all. So yeah, very compelled and just compelled by the people like who I was able to work with, like Jaeden and Rachel and Lachlan and all of them, just great people and people around my age, but who are doing things that I could never imagine I would be able to do ever. And
Yeah.
so yeah, that was also very compelling. Yeah.
Did Kyle have any special guidance or instructions to help put you into 1999? Like, did he put something together as like to help with your frame of reference and as far as pop culture, technology, that kind of thing?
Yeah, they burned some CDs for us and they gave us a little Discman, I guess we could call it, or some kind of
Yeah,
like
like Walkman.
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
disc CD.
Oh, we're so young and so little and so.
Uh-huh.
Bleh.
Um, and then like an 18-hour long Spotify playlist
Oh
too.
wow.
Yeah.
And some films that I can't remember
Yeah, they
honestly.
sent us a list of films, a lot of stuff. I think we just like chatted with them a lot. Like we would rehearse scenes Um, we were like before shooting and we would just chat and they'd be like, oh yeah, this happened and we're like, oh, why are we saying like why are we taking a photo of that? Or there was like one day where we just went out and walked around and there was like this high school nearby and we just like walked around the high school and took photos and just kind of hung out and they'll that kind of helped us understand the vibe of Danny and Eli and they probably had a lot of days just walking home from school just mucking around and doing stupid shit and that also helped as well.
Yeah. Because Kyle comes from a comedy background and usually like there's typically some improv involved, did you guys have freedom for doing alternate takes and whatnot while you guys were shooting?
Yeah, yeah, no, they gave us a lot of freedom, which is kind of like, which is, I feel like is a bit nerve-wracking when it comes to trying to be funny,
Yeah.
because I feel like I feel like I don't know, I don't want to speak on behalf, but like if you have like a stand-up comedian, it's like they have a set, like they know what's going to work and they know that they know they're going to get a laugh out of it. So it is kind of daunting when you have like someone like Kyle and you have Evan and they write these amazing jokes and they write this thing and they're like, okay, you can play with it now. And it's like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't really want to hold your baby. Like I don't really want to like risk dropping your baby. So,
Mm.
it took a lot of trust from us, but also a lot of trust from them to be able to give us the reins and be like, hey, like go for it. And, I think it worked out. I think there's some stuff in the film that made it in and some stuff that I remember that we did that didn't make it in that I thought was gonna make it in. I'm like, dude, that joke is so good and it's not in the film. So
What was some of the stuff like deleted scenes or like the lines that you were bummed didn't make the final cut?
the bazooka didn't make it in the final cut, right?
I don't think we did that in the movie, did we?
No, no.
Or did
We
we?
did it. We
Did
did a
we?
take of it.
Oh, we
Yeah,
did.
there was this really cool thing that Jaeden like kind of came up from like the top of his mind. It was brilliant. It was amazing. Where it's like there's a scene and I don't know, I pretend to have a bazooka and he kind of like punches his fist through my hole and like
With a middle finger.
with a middle finger, and we thought it was sick. And I think we did one take, and then I think they might have thought it was a bit too much. And
So seemed to her. Said it was like too good to be
yeah, it was
true.
like too good. It's like, oh man, and they almost
They
too in
were
sync.
forcing their
Yeah,
chemistry. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That sounds really funny. Jaeden, what was it like? Because a lot of your work up to now has been, a little more dramatic, and this leans obviously into comedy. What was it like stretching those muscles and getting into that, new genre?
Um, it was pretty scary, honestly. It was especially like I mentioned before, I'm I look up to Kyle so much. So it was pretty pretty intimidating to come into it. And honestly, yeah, I remember specifically like signing up to do it, auditioning, um, and then sort of some stuff went down, and basically we didn't end up shooting it until like I was tasked for it for like something like 8 months, like a while. And by the time we got to it, they're like, okay, we're gonna shoot on this date. I felt like terrified. I was like, are they sure they want me still? Like, I don't know. Which I get on every project that happens, but especially coming into comedy, which I don't feel too confident in. It's something that doesn't seem capturable or manageable to me. It
Yeah.
feels like this mythical thing that, someone like Kyle is mastered and understands, and his brain works in that way, and I feel separate from that. But um, Kyle and his partner Evan and my partner Julian and Rachel and everyone made it feeling comfortable with them made it so much easier for me, and especially because I'm funniest with that when I feel comfortable with someone when
Yeah.
I'm close to someone. Like I think most people are. So being feeling like a tight unit, feeling like friends, and feeling like we can say whatever the fuck we want, like made all the difference and
Yeah.
really helped me feel comfortable doing this thing that I'm not used to doing.
That's awesome. Yeah, because it felt very natural, and I would love to see you do more comedy stuff like this for sure.
That's awesome, man.
You're a
Thank
funny
you.
guy, man.
Thanks.
Now, I wanted to ask too, what was it like working with Fred Durst? Was Limp Bizkit a group that you guys were familiar with? Were you guys fans beforehand? I just want to know what that was like.
Definitely familiar. I didn't know what to expect from him as a person, considering his persona, his look, his
Yeah,
music, but he was like such a kind and wise presence, and it kind of like blew me away. There's certain things because you expect a lot from an actor you look up
yeah,
to or anybody you look up to, and you kind of expect something from them, and they could disappoint you or they could. But I didn't know what to expect from Fred, and um he was so kind and so like cool and gentle and inquisitive and like open about his process of being an artist and being this kind of icon and the pressure of that and all that. He was wonderful.
that's awesome. Julian, was the same experience same for you?
Yeah, it was different for me actually because we kind of shot the film chronologically, so
Oh, okay, so
obviously
you didn't really get
the
to spend any
film
time
and
with them. Yeah.
yeah, and didn't really get to spend any time with him. But meeting him, like at South by Southwest and after we shot, yeah, I don't know. It's just you when you meet someone who's lived a lot of life and has a lot of wisdom, and all you can really do is be a sponge and kind of like soak them in. I think that was, a highlight of being able to even just be in the same room as him, and it's like he's like he defines a generation or like a thing of time, right? Like a
Yeah.
certain time, and I don't know. I think it's pretty crazy that we get to do what we get to do.
All right, and then finally, Brad's discussion with Kyle Mooney and Evan Winter. Brad, any setup for this one?
No, it's was just great to talk to them. I got to see them when they were in Chicago showing the movie, and so I made sure to ask about some of the stuff they talked about there, so that people could hear about it on the podcast. And so yeah, we cover a lot about the inception of the idea and the practical effects for the creatures. And the soundtrack and just yeah, all sorts of good stuff. So it's a good chat.
Cool. All right, here is that conversation.
So just to begin with, how did the inception of this idea come about? Has it been in your back pocket for a while, or did it come about recently?
Honestly, I just spit out ideas like this every 10, 15 minutes. And I was walking behind him with a pad of paper, being like, that one's good. That's pretty good. I don't like that one. That one's good.
That we can.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think for those of us who were around during Y2K, it was, just such a major letdown. I've always been minorly obsessed with it, and I think I held on to that for years. And one day, it was December, so it was January 1st, 2019, New Year's Day. I had the small seed of an idea of like there should be a movie about teenagers going to a party and Y2K actually happens. And I texted Evan and we started pitching on it, coming up with
Yeah.
ideas, and within a week we pretty much had the building blocks for what this movie would be. And I think we were both Evan was in eighth grade in the 99 2000 year. I was a freshman. I think there was something very exciting to us about putting that era on screen because you don't get to see it a ton. And that was like our whole teenage life, pretty much.
Yeah, I think only just now are they starting to dig back into like late '90s, 2000s as like nostalgia for big screen fodder now.
Which is funny because I feel like historically, like when people make movies or kind of call back to a previous era, it's usually like 10 to 15 years later.
Yeah,
And now it's like, oh, it's almost 25. So it feels like for whatever reason, there's like a longer gap for this period, but it's
yeah, for sure.
worth the
Hey,
wait.
we'll take it.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised too because like the conceptually it feels like such like a no-brainer idea that like I'm surprised that no one did this like oh well, what if Y2K did happen like this, like it's
Dude,
such a good idea.
we've been saying the same thing for years. We can't believe that no one had this idea before us.
Yeah, there is some TV movie that was made in 99, which we watched the trailer for. I never watched all the way through. And I feel like maybe there's some like planes that crash in it or something like that. But yeah, I agree. Like so fortunate that we are the first people to do it.
Yeah. What were some of your cinematic influences for the movie? I feel like I got a little bit of The Faculty in there, maybe some Gremlins and Small Soldiers crossover because of Joe Dante.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously the movie has a pretty big turn. So that early period where it is pre-midnight and it is kind of like a teen house party movie, there's a real wealth of those films like that genre in the kind of late 90s, like She's All That, Can't Hardly Wait, 10 Things I Hate About You. And those were like, we wanted to try to filter like that kind of era of kind of fun like teen studio house party comedies through like also maybe a slightly more realistic like what it felt like, remembering what it felt like when we lived through that time.
Yeah.
But that just the structure of it was something that those movies were definitely a big influence on us. And then after the turn, yeah, I mean, I love The Faculty. We talked about The Faculty quite a bit. There's Hackers was another one that we talked about. Yeah, what else? I don't know. The later,
I mean, yeah, also just like from pulling references, like it would be like Lawnmower Man,
Virtuosity.
yeah, I'm, it doesn't get a ton of representation in terms of like the story of our arc of our film, but one uh piece of media that I'm like very into are these Mind's Eye videos. I don't know if you're aware of those, but it's like early computer graphics, but that was
Really
just
cool.
more of just like an aesthetic
Visual
influence.
reference, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess like I don't know. There's a lot for us too, like in terms of just aesthetics and research. Kyle is a big like YouTube rabbit hole guy, and he just in terms of when we were figuring out costumes and hair and makeup and kind of just the overall look, Kyle did a lot of research looking at like teenagers messing around on video cameras, like video yearbooks, or just like walking through the halls in the
Yeah.
late 90s. That stuff is all on YouTube. And I feel like we were hoping that that energy kind of comes through
Yeah.
in various
I was
ways.
thinking, I just remembering today. I don't know if you remember me showing you there was this TV show in '99 about seniors in high school called American High that was on
Yes.
PBS.
Uh,
That is really a really good time capsule of the era. And there's like a character in it whose name I can't remember right now, who like almost could be a member of our like quote unquote rap rock crew. I think he's like wearing a corn shirt and
yeah,
he's just
he's
like a
playing
full on
drums. He's a
troublemaker.
total spaz.
He
Yeah,
puts like
it's
on
like
like a Tigger costume at some point.
that was a really cool thing to see because I'd never seen it before we were prepping this.
Did you have any rules for yourselves as far as like the late 90s vibes that you wanted to stay away from?
Hmm.
I think like I mean, one thing that I think we just always try to be conscious of is just like and Evan's touched upon this before, so I don't want to steal your thunder by any means, but like there's media out there that can really like exploit nostalgia and like kind of hit you so hard with the references. Sometimes it's just a list of references and there's nothing more beyond that. Um, so I think that was something that we carried with us was more just like a constant gut check of does this feel right? Are we hitting something too hard? Are we serving the story and the characters correctly here? I don't know if we thought anything was like out of bounds, but I think we were definitely constantly thinking of like, let's be as smart and thoughtful about this as we can.
Yeah. Did you have any concerns about the soundtrack? Because there's a lot of great needle drops within like the first act of the movie, and I wondered like, was that a pricier part of getting the movie together? Because there's so many of them and they come so fast.
I mean, yeah, I think well we wrote into the script a lot of these needle drops, not necessarily the exact song that made it in the end, but those moments we knew kind of from the scripting phase that we wanted to have a pretty like iconic or era specific needle drop. And so I think everyone was aware going into the shoot that like we had to set aside a certain amount for the songs because it was really baked into the movie, including, our main character like making a mix CD that then kind of keeps popping up throughout the night. So it was really in the DNA of the film. I don't know if I could tell you what our music budget was, but it was something that like we were aware that it was going to be a question of at times like we're probably gonna have to like write some letters to some artists and hope that they give us a deal because we were trying to really squeeze a lot of cool songs in there. And sometimes we couldn't get the initial one that we wanted, and we found an alt. And I think we now can't imagine, that original song being in there because we just love the song that we wound up with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Shifting gears, I wanted to talk about the process of creating the creatures for this movie because they're practical and they're so cool. What was the process of that like? Was it difficult to execute on set?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was
was
something.
amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was something Evan and I talked about pretty early on in terms of conceptualizing this thing. Like, we've always wanted this to feel like a movie made from the era, and so it made a lot of sense to go practical whenever we could. We were really fortunate to work with Weta, and what's so amazing about them, like, we gave them we had pretty decent ideas of where we wanted to land on how these creatures looked. But truly, like, all their first round of conceptual art was like so close, I think, to what we had in our head. And it's rare that you find yourself in these situations where you're working with collaborators who like can not only like kind of sink into your vision, but also like add something completely awesome to it. So like we were psyched with that whole process. And yeah, I mean,
It was incredible. Like it was probably almost a year. Like we started working with them so soon after, we got the go to make the movie. And it was, yeah, probably the better part of a year developing the designs, landing on it. And then they start fabricating and they start sending us, test videos, and they would make like cardboard cutout silhouettes so they can be like, this is what it'll look like, like this is the size compared to like a normal person. But then there's just so many challenges with like, I think they told us that the larger creature was like the heaviest practical suit they've ever built for a single person that like isn't being, assisted by puppeteers. And like just the way to distribute the weight to make those screens like work practically, emit light so that we can interact with our performers on set. There's inside they have like controls, claws and different joysticks that can move other elements.
Wow.
And just the logistics of how to make all of that work while simultaneously allowing the performers to be able to be in those suits and work for hours, like is just it's such a needle to thread that was incredible to see it all come together.
That's great. What was it like working with Fred Durst? And was it always Fred Durst from the get-go? Because his inclusion, and I didn't even think about this until you guys touched upon it a little bit during the Q&A at the Chicago screening, but like he really is like representative of like that era of music and pop culture in a way that almost nobody else, is. It's a very specific window of time and pop culture. So yeah, did you guys have a backup plan if he wasn't interested, if it didn't work out?
I mean, we definitely pitched ideas, and he was there, yeah, from moment one. From I think the first week of us talking about the movie, we were like, oh, it'd be really fun to get Fred Durst in there, sort of fighting along with our heroes. Yeah, there were definitely pitches. I don't even know if I want to name those names, but any name we would say, it's like either they like weren't as recognizable in some way or another, or like maybe they like are not on the best side of culture these days.
Not a good person today.
Yeah, Fred just checked all the boxes, and like you said, he's just so emblematic and so iconic, and like He's got the hat. He's got like everything going for him. So there was a lot riding on that, and he's the first person we went out to when we found out the movie was going. And if if he hadn't taken the job, I don't know what we would have done.
Yeah, we were really lucky that he just got it and was into it, and wanted to kind of poke fun at himself. He kind of pushed it further in some places, but then also like just understood that it's like he's playing this kind of public persona of himself from that era, but then like in this excised like superhero way and almost like action star. So it was so cool that he was into it and jumped on board with us.
And just a very good actor.
Amazing actor, yeah.
Yeah, he was so much fun in the movie.
Crazy.
Kyle, I'm a big fan of your work with Good Neighbor and Saturday Night Live. And I was curious, what lessons did you learn at SNL that maybe have helped you both as a performer and a filmmaker since you left the show?
I mean, I think that like any professional experience or any filmmaking experience is always going to teach you something, and you're kind of going to grab what works for you and what doesn't. And so like you're kind of constantly collecting these like ways of working and interacting with people on set. So that's sort of everything I've ever done. But I think specifically like SNL, well, one, you have like celebrities, full-on stars coming in every single week. And so you have to sort of learn how to interact and to talk and to potentially give a note or get on the same level of them in terms of like dictating what is funny about something or and then what that show also what does and presents for me as or presented for me as a writer is all of a sudden you're learning what plays or what doesn't play for a broader audience. And so like I definitely took that into the process of writing with Evan about like, okay, this feels like something that could maybe get a laugh. Maybe we're going a little too niche here. And also I am just less precious about my work because we would be on Saturday, cutting stuff day of, getting rid of chunks of dialogue. So like I don't care if we have to get rid of a page. I always know that there's always an alt or there's always a way to punch it up.
Yeah, it was very cool from my side seeing the way that Kyle works because it's so much easier to not be precious about something or to just like roll with it, yeah, and be like, well, maybe this could be better, or like maybe this isn't clicking, even though it really means something to me to see like my partner in this just being like, yeah, like I have faith that we can always find something better. Or like if people aren't responding to this, or I have a feeling about it, or he has a feeling about it that isn't quite working, that like let's just lose it. It's a really good lesson for making stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all I got for time. They're giving me the light, so I got to get out of here. But thanks a lot, guys. I love the movie. I'm really looking forward to seeing it again. So yeah, it's great stuff.
Thanks so much,
Thank
Bradford.
you.
Good to see you again.
You too. Take it easy, guys.
All right, that's going to do it for today's show. You can find more about Y2K, including Jacob's interview from South by Southwest at slashfilm.com. I will link to that in the show notes. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really helps us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. We'd really appreciate that. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you all next week.